Hello and welcome to the Brandon Romacco podcast. I have with me today Dave Ferguson, who is the developer of the integrated martial arts method, specifically for middle-aged men. Hello and welcome.
Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
So maybe we can just start with a little bit of your story of sort of how you came to sort of focus on creating a program to help men specifically.
Absolutely. I think for myself, I'm right through my employment career. I've had some degree of support within my roles, really. So I think there's something potentially there quite natural. But as the years went on in my full-time role, I wasn't gaining the change in people that I was working with that I wanted to see, or I certainly didn't have a measure of that. And that in itself was a bit of a problem. So if I take a few steps back, a few years, probably around to just before COVID, really. And I've done martial arts for many years. I'm in my 40th year of martial arts career. Um, and during just before the COVID stage started, obviously I was not obviously, but I was still managing to train and do some martial arts at home. But obviously there was no gyms available at the time, no dojos, which is a place of where martial arts carry out their work really. And alongside that, I had other incidents going on in my life. So, and they kind of compacted together. So I think, like a lot of blokes probably do, that I'm relatively resilient
Mhm.
and I can handle stress and crises. And I think that's true, maybe for others to say sometimes, but I think I've probably proven that to some extent. But in this particular condensed period in my life, multiple traumatic experiences really tested my resilience, which something martial arts has always to some extent helped with. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail into each of them incidents. Really, the message really is just that sometimes we all need a bit of support, and sometimes these
Particularly men,
events,
right?
yeah, yeah, exactly, and sometimes these events, regrettably, come in threes, and in this case, actually fours,
Hmm.
compounded, and really can test us. And there's nothing wrong with that. And some of them are quite natural. So one of them was a bereavement
Right.
and in many ways, as middle aged men, that regrettably is something that a huge amount of us will have to deal with, whether that's kind of people we know, can be peers, parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, that type of thing. It's a relatively natural cycle, you could argue, that some many middle-aged men will have to go through. But I'm going to take another half a step back. First traumatic incident was related to a very good friend of mine who was the victim of a very violent attack
Mm.
in which he suffered significant brain damage.
Oh no.
And, yes, I know, and has never managed to fully recover
Hmm.
because of the extent of the damage. And um, I was there in a supportive role because I think, as I mentioned right at the beginning, that's one of the things I do. It's
Hmm.
part of what I think is something I do quite well. And we had to go for the criminal justice process. And being a civil servant at the time, I was almost naturally afforded that role of sort of helping the family where I could through that criminal justice process, through the knowledge that I had, and maybe explaining some of the context and what some of the things that they would have to go through on top of this actual violent incident. Um, and that was really challenging for many ways, even more so for the family immediately close to my friend, and to some extent myself, actually, as I said, going through that experience in general. Some feelings of guilt, probably nothing in the world I could have done about it, but it doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you don't feel some guilt. And then going through the whole criminal justice process. Now, being in the criminal justice, I understand the practical steps that needs to be gone through a criminal justice process. But I probably wasn't aware of the emotional side of it being so close to the individual.
Mm.
So that probably affected me in a way that I was probably a little surprised at, but managed to get through it. The individual was sentenced to, I think, relatively appropriate sentences. And to some extent, we felt that was some degree of closure. It's never full closure
Mm-hmm.
because the family, particularly, have to live with this for the rest of their lives. But to some extent, there was some degree of closure for the criminal justice process, received a sentence, and to some extent, you could move on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Following that, I had a bereavement of a very close relative around 6 months later. And that itself, again, was challenging. It's my auntie, and she had dementia and a
Oh no, that's
relatively,
awful.
yeah, a relatively harsh version of that. Um, and that itself was quite challenging. You're probably not surprised to know because you kind of lose the identity of that person,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a real challenge. And then when they do pass, you don't know if it's you knew it was coming, so you think maybe that would be an easy thing to manage, maybe to some extent, but it doesn't always work like that. It still can be incredibly traumatic, which it was.
Mm.
Um, and then following that, again, over a relatively short period of time, I witnessed quite a challenging situation where some of my children were involved in an incident in a local town, um, and one of them was physically harmed.
Oh wow.
And when I arrived at the scene to see what on earth was going on, I was in a bit of a state myself. That is true. But regrettably, our police force and some of the dominant stereotypical imagery around, behavior with people of ethnic minorities did come to fruition.
Oh
And the individuals that had harmed two of my children, actually three in the end, unbelievably, they were escorted scot-free with a sort of possession of some form. And subsequently, five police officers attacked me and sprayed me consistently with various substances.
no way.
And in the case, in the case notes, it said because I was so strong and so amazingly strong and tough, um, that they just had to keep spraying. And it was again, it was a real traumatic experience. And I think that was the third one. And by then, I probably was starting to reel. I think just started to be aware of, started to reel a little bit. And that's where I probably was the first signs of struggle, really struggling a bit, started to impact my work and things like that. And then the final one was more health related. And I really wouldn't mind sharing this a little more with certainly some of the middle-aged men that may be listening to this. Because the message really is around preventatism in this case. So I had an issue with my testes
Mm.
and some discomfort, and didn't think a huge amount about it. I just thought it was something like tight boxer shorts or something ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
like that. And eventually I went to the GP to get some further information. Really,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is. I'm not one of them blokes who just hide things forever. If there's something I don't know about, I don't understand it, I
Mm-hmm.
don't guess, I won't go into Google. I may ask someone like yourself, Brandon, but I won't just go wildly on Google, and I won't
Mm-hmm.
just keep to myself.
Yeah.
So I will go to the GP, and I have no problem with that. And I know some men, not always the case. My first experience was quite a poor one, actually, because the doctor, it was a female doctor, and I'm not saying that's necessarily the case of all female doctors at all. But in this case, it was a bit poo-pooed, really. She didn't really seem to take it that serious, did an inspection on me, which is not the most comfortable
Yeah.
thing in the
Yeah.
world. But, you're still, the benefits, I think, potentially would outweigh that
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortability. But at the end of it, she said, well, I don't know what that is. And it was around, she said about taking some paracetamol and stuff, which I'm no expert in that
Wow.
field. Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert, Brandon, by any extent, not even a layman in that sense, but it didn't quite sound right,
Right.
you know. Um, so I sort of went back home and didn't think that was quite right, but still to some extent thought, well, at least I've had a professional to check, leave it at that. Maybe there's some placebo there effect there that now I feel maybe it's been checked, I might be all right. That wasn't the case. And months later, still had that discomfort, went back to the doctors again. This time it was a male doctor. Again, I'm not guaranteeing that means that every male doctor will
Mm-hmm.
take it seriously, but in this case, it was the case. And straight away, he came up with solutions, theories, um, things about this particular muscle that gets a little saggy, if you like, as we get older, hence the kind of balls drop thing as we become older. That made some sort of sense, and a bit of research about that. He said, but just to sort of fulfill, my and your sort of concern, we'll also have an ultrasound as well
Mm-hmm.
to follow that up. Again, made perfect sense. Went for the ultrasound, and I think I've been for ultrasounds for various things, like when I ruptured my Achilles tendon and things like that. And you usually know, I know the people who do the ultrasound are not necessarily the experts in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of consultants, but they obviously do these tests all the time.
Yeah.
So they at least have some awareness, what probably is looking good or what isn't.
Yeah.
And I think by then that was probably the first time I realized something probably was wrong, because they were very quiet.
Mm.
And then they said pretty much straight after, your GP will be in touch with you within days.
Mm.
Something like that. I thought, oh, bloody hell, that's not so good.
Yeah.
So within days, they had been in touch, and they sort of referred me to a specialist in London, the University Hospital, and saw the consultant. And they were really, really helpful from there, actually, I mean, to be fair. And again, to all men who are a little bit worried or wary, or think the NHS is falling to pieces, or no one won't do anything, or no one cares, that is not the case. Absolutely 100% not the case, as far as I could report. And they were fantastic. But one slight, maybe mildly funny anecdote. I thought it was funny at the time. I didn't think it was funny at the time. I think it's funny now, reflecting on it. But seeing the consultant, who was also a woman, she recommended to, even though we didn't know if it's malignant or not, almost like safety first, to operate, because we just don't know for sure. But probably on the balance of probabilities, it's probably safer to operate. So I kind of thought, wasn't sure, but she kept on, pushing that, saying that's probably the best way, but we could leave it for a little bit of time and review. That was another option.
Mm-hmm.
And then she mentioned how, don't worry, because even if we had to remove your testicle, we could replace it with a plastic version.
Yeah. Yeah.
She said it so nonchalantly, and she was like going around, sort of taking these notes, and I was like, whoa, hold on a minute, what did you just say? And I think her assistant thought it was absolutely hilarious. Now, that didn't turn out to be the case. It wasn't needed. And I just explained as a fella, that's something you might need to just tread a little more carefully with. I understand the practical, rational,
Mm-hmm.
but you might need to be a little more careful with that. Anyway, cut a long story short, I did go under the knife. It wasn't malignant, which
That's
you
good.
think, oh, was it worth it? I probably should have done it. But
you never know.
You don't know, do you? You just don't know, do you? So that was fantastic. That was all clear. And I think the only message I'd like to share, really, with certainly any middle-aged men on there, when you do have anything, these sort of discomforts, do your regular checks. If there is anything that's abnormal, go to your GP. I know the first occasion wasn't that successful, but the second certainly was. And I think more importantly, once there was some awareness of this issue, the speed, efficiency, and professionalism of the health service was immaculate. And you probably know better than I do, Brandon, the likelihoods of return in this particular cancer is extremely low. It's extremely low risk operation as far as cancer goes.
Yeah. As far as cancer goes, that's one of the better ones. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So preventativeness is the key for all men out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too rude, but we often pee around with that area anyway, for pleasure, shall I say. So let's make sure we balance that with protection and care and health as well.
Actually, if I can interrupt, because I think this is an appropriate point, because I actually have a similar story that I don't think I've told before, about Canadian healthcare. And I've had a friend diagnosed with cancer, and went under the knife, and everything turned out okay. But my own story, so I had something maybe 2 or 3 centimeters in size, and I had a couple of them actually, one bigger one and one smaller one. And now, this was before I went through the healthcare system. So cancerous versus non-cancerous, tumorous versus a hydrocele, which is very benign. You can sort of tell if you shine a light through it. You get an idea of how opaque it is. Yeah. And you can also get a feel for how much it moves, how stuck is it to the other tissue. So there are some clinical sort of tricks to give you hints about the diagnosis, even without going to ultrasound. Now, I'm actually now an ultrasound technician as an addition to my other credentials, and so I have an
Mm.
ultrasound unit. I can now look now, but at the time she just squeezed and like, oh yeah, there's a bump there. Um, Now for men, you can also have something called men can get a special hernia that women can't, called an indirect hernia. And so hopefully your doctor's also trained to check for something like that as well.
Mm.
Because men, there's the spermatocord that sort of comes out through the abdomen through this channel, and your organs can start coming through that channel, which can be painful. Did they check for a hernia for you?
No, not as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Oh well,
Yeah,
they
not as far
felt
as I'm
something was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I saw one of your previous podcasts, one of your guests talking about the hernias, and then you were talking about the different walls and
Yeah.
some different types of hernias, and some what you can do with it, but some are could be incredibly serious as well and
Yeah.
life threatening.
Yep, definitely. Because hernia is your abdominal contents, which is your intestines, and you can imagine if your intestines start coming out, that means all your food has to come out too through a small hole or through a small channel. So your food gets blocked, and then you can't digest food, and you die. So it can be serious, not just inconvenient. Um, so I needed to this particular female doctor just squeezed like, yeah, there's something there. I'll send you for an ultrasound. So I went to the imaging department, and I think it was February, and I asked, okay, can I book an appointment? Okay, what do you think of March? I'm like, okay, March, yeah, I can do March. Yeah, March of the next year. It was a 13-month wait for an ultrasound.
Wow.
So if it had been cancerous, I would have been screwed. I might have been screwed. Now, not every hospital is like this, but I want to any Canadians listening. You do not have to go to the imaging department at the hospital. You can go to another hospital. Take the note from the doctor or get a note from the doctor. Go to another hospital. Find a shorter time. A lot of Canadians, because of the free healthcare system, and the government actually cracks down on private clinics. There's a very limited number of private clinics because they don't want there to be a two-tiered healthcare system. But private clinics do exist in the larger cities. There's not a lot of them. They don't really advertise that much. But you can go get an ultrasound like the next day at these private clinics instead of waiting 13 months. And in Canada, paying cash, they're in between. Well, actually, in the States, they're about this price too. They're in between $100 to maybe $300 to just get an answer right away. And my goodness, for the amount of weight I took, I could have become a sonographer actually at that point and bought a machine and checked myself. Sorry, we can get back to your story. So you had quite a
Yeah,
lot
so
of.
yeah, yeah, so that was yeah, I mean I wanted to share that just from a health point of view, but that was like if you like the fourth in this probably over about a year of traumatic incidents that I think really impacted on my resilience. And I think for me, it was that point where I started to struggle a bit. And I think the point I probably realized the most was I think my wife wanted to go out somewhere. I think I know she wanted to go out and somewhere I really didn't want to. I just didn't feel like it. The mood by then was a bit low. I was a bit sluggish,
Mhm.
or not necessarily realizing at the time, but certainly in hindsight, I was a bit sluggish. And she just wanted to go. So yeah, okay, all right, I'll do that. And I couldn't. Was it my keys or something? It was something really non-important. Like I couldn't find my keys or my bottle of water or my watch or something like that. And basically, I almost like just sort of flopped. I just couldn't find the keys. That was the end of it. I couldn't move. I was completely annoyed, flustered, and that was probably the first time for myself. I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on here? So with the martial arts and employment sort of thing, I had been continuing to do, the martial arts, as I said, but it wasn't quite having the same impact that it had over the decades.
Mm.
Wasn't enjoying it quite as much. I wasn't getting the same physical and mindfulness benefits,
Mm.
shall we say. So I kind of started to go back to some of my traditional martial arts because I kind of used to really enjoy them from back in the day. They're more traditional around kind of kung fu and forms and breathing. So I started to go back to that. And that was quite helpful, but it still didn't quite do the trick. And lo and behold, I started to combine some of the traditional forms and styles of the traditional martial arts with some of the newer evidence, almost in the golden age of martial arts, the last 20, 30 years, something to do around mixed martial arts. And some of it was just testing different martial arts together and seeing how different programs and exercise bases could be mixed together into a whole. So
Mm.
it's very experimental at the beginning. I didn't really have much clarity exactly
Yeah.
where I was going, but I knew I needed to change something. And I started to sort of test these things out. I was the ultimate guinea pig because I just try everything on
Yeah.
myself, basically. And I started to get the shoots of recovery in so much as I started to look forward to it. I started to enjoy it. That was probably step one, actually. And almost the second step was maybe getting some of the physical benefits
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I always feel really where my eureka moment was is when other people notice them changes, because sometimes you might be the slowest to recognize them. And after about 3 or 4 months of just hodgepodging and bringing different arts together and bringing different styles together, several colleagues, remember this is at the back end of COVID, we're still just sort of getting all the vaccinations out. I used to work in the prison system, the prison and probation system. So you can only imagine for a second how incredibly important it would be to get this, how easy it would to catch the virus within prison
Mm-hmm.
environments, and how important and challenging it was to get that vaccination out there. So really testing times for myself and my civil service colleagues. But lo and behold, everyone was saying, well, they're under pressure, they're stressed out, but Dave's absolutely fine. Look at him. He's bubbling, he's buzzing,
Mm-hmm.
he's solution focused. What on earth is your secret, Dave? And of course, I didn't really know. I said, well, I'm not sure, you know. Um, but probably by about the seventh or eighth person that said the same thing, I thought, actually, I think I might know what it is. I've started to do bring these martial arts together. I've started to do this. I've been training more outdoors because one of the things you could do, our government at the time allowed us to go outside to public parks. So I was doing a lot of outdoor training
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then for me, it was very much a lot of these guys that I work with, as I said, they're sort of leaders, middle managers, high level responsibilities, quite intelligent individual, but often very stressed and pressured, particularly in that context. But they're always quite pressured and stressed, really, if I'm honest with you. And maybe that just goes with some of the roles.
Mm-hmm.
So I started just to share, Brandon, some of the things I was doing. I said, well, look, this is my morning routine. This is what I do. This is what I do at the end of the day to relax. This is what I do first thing in the morning, some sort of positive type exercises and sort of beneficial type things, things that I'm sort of pleased with, happy with, grateful for,
Mm.
that sort of area. And I shared some of that learning with colleagues. And I said, look, give it a go, sort of thing, see how you get on.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, within weeks, they were coming back to me and saying, this is absolutely fantastic, really enjoying it. I'm getting the benefits from it. It's making life at work a little bit easier. And I thought, great,
Yeah.
great. And that just sort of got wider and wider. And without knowing at the time, it was about, 2.5 years ago now? Something like that. Without knowing at the time, that was probably the start of the integrated martial arts method. Um, I just want to touch upon very briefly the first time it didn't quite work.
Okay.
And that was probably my first delving into more neurological health. I've
Mm.
always had some sort of amateur interest or
Mm-hmm.
lay interest, if you like, that sort of how to the beginner's books type thing. Always found that fascinating. And where that really helped integrating with the method was the first person that Started off a million miles an hour with what I said,
Mm.
was absolutely doing brilliantly and almost too well. Thought, this guy's amazing. He lost loads of weight straight away, was feeling absolutely brilliant within about 2, 3 weeks, which is nothing wrong with that. But then they seem to peter out really quickly and sort of delve into a bit of self-loathing. As soon as they started brilliantly, everything was going to work brilliantly, and then they sort of went down this other end. And that was the first time I started to understand a little bit more about kind of our different neurological uh, styles, if you like.
Yeah.
How people sort of perceive information, what kind of support they need.
Hmm.
And really, that person needed to understand a little bit more, not to be too down and to paint a picture of that sort of pattern that will
Yeah.
be happening all the time, almost linking in a bit of relapse prevention work.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's where the neurological aspect, still fairly basic, but was really helpful also integrating with the martial arts. And that seemed to cover a far wider range of individuals with some of their challenges. So yeah, that was the beginning really of starting to formulate this program that I since developed into a full method, with our flagship total rejuvenation program being the end result of that.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say I thought well, it makes sense. You must be middle aged, but you do not look middle aged. You look younger than I do. I think you look about 30s. Like I look
Wow,
young
that's
for my
amazing.
age. I know,
Yeah.
but
Well,
how old are
I'm
you?
glad this is recorded. Yeah, so I'm 55. Yeah, so I mean, I've had probably there may be some genetic influence in the sense I've probably looked youngish most of my life. So there's a bit of that. But I also would say the same 3 years ago that we spoke about, particularly during that traumatic period, I didn't look like this.
Mm,
I was, everything was just a little slower and a little sadder,
mhm.
and my eyes were a little lower, and my voice was a little more sluggish. My belly was a little puffier, and I just wasn't as happy. So yeah, a little bit of genetics there, I think is fair to mention, but yeah, I am in a completely different space than I was 2 or 3 years ago. Now, for me, in my particular case, it did mean leaving the civil service, because after 25 years, I think I touched on this right at the beginning. I was originally what we call a probation officer in this country. There's an equivalent of something in America, Canada, I'm sure as well.
Mhm.
Most countries. And one of the reasons I wanted to be a probation officer is to help people change. So most of the people that I worked with, were involved in the criminal justice. Criminal justice service, had committed an offence of some sort, had been to court, and had either been to prison and then were released on what we'd call a license for a period of time, or they would be sentenced to what we call a community disposal, which could be things like unpaid work, a cognitive behavioral therapy program to
Yep.
help change that behavior.
Mhm.
Yeah, you should know a bit about that, Brandon. Um, and yeah, so my role was to help manage these sentences, to help elicit change and to reduce that risk to the public. And it's something I really enjoyed and took very serious, incredibly challenging, I must admit, but absolutely knew it was a vital piece of work. And I suppose as the years ticked on, one of the biggest problems for me was, over the years and even decades, there was no clear, real measurement to know how much people that I had changed. I mean,
Mm.
you hope you don't see some people for a while. You think maybe they've changed, maybe they haven't. They may come back onto the books again. These type of things. But for me, someone who's into data analysis, evidence,
Mhm.
that became immensely frustrating, because I didn't know if I looked after or supported, cared for 200 people, for example. I had no idea if I'd helped them. I had no idea if I'd changed their life a little bit, a lot, was part of a holistic group of change, because you might have housing people, psychologists, a probation officer, a prison
Mhm.
officer, that type of thing. So it's not just me, but I still didn't have no idea how or if I'd change people. Whereas right at the beginning with this new venture, even the first 6, 7 people that I'd worked with, I knew I'd done something. I didn't have the measures in place, to be fair, but I knew I'd done something because I could see 2 or 3 weeks later they were quite happy and
Yeah.
slightly different, and they were reporting breathing a bit better, and their wife had said they got some of their humour back, and all these wonderful, massive measures
Hmm.
that were coming out. And I thought, this is just fantastic. So for me, I had to take that opportunity to move on and find this new space where I knew, was fairly confident that I could help people change their life for the better. Something that consistently in my mind for so long. Now, to be fair, Brandon, many of my colleagues have stayed on because they're not either not ready to leave, they can't leave at the moment, it's not
Hmm.
the right time, they're near retirement, they have young children, they have a ginormous mortgage, and these are all reasonably solid factors that
Hmm.
where you might not be able to leave. So that was, I suppose, another aspect why I wanted to certainly design the total rejuvenation mastery program for those leaders, middle managers, directors who were going to stay in their role, who had these everyday challenges, and I just thought I could help them in many aspects of their life do that. So for me, it was absolutely the right thing to leave and have a change in career, but I also respect that for many others, they can't do that.
And I'll jump in with, and I've mentioned this on other talks as well. There's a movement in medicine. It's a board certified medical specialty called lifestyle medicine, and
Okay.
it there's also I think there's a British board of lifestyle medicine or a UK board of lifestyle medicine, and so it's a growing movement because well, medicine typically is very evidence based, but it's also fairly slow to act, slow to
Yes.
change. But we have tons and tons of studies with great statistics, like 50,000 people in a study, 100,000 people in a study, looking at things like levels of activity, diet, and even surveys about do you find enjoyment? Do you have hobbies? Do you have things like that? And these things have such a huge impact on all cause mortality.
Yeah.
They just find if this person walks 10 minutes a day versus the person who doesn't walk 10 minutes a day, the person who doesn't walk dies 10 years earlier on average. It's like holy crap. you know
Incredible, isn't it?
yeah, it's crazy the amount of years that get saved, or more years that you can have, and the more years you can enjoy if you find purpose to your life, if you find things that you enjoy, if you are get that little bit of activity every day, if or regularly, it doesn't have to be every day, but regularly, if you keep stress under control.
Oh yes, that's a
Stress
big
and
one.
long period sitting are both super killer. Stress just tanks testosterone levels. If you're diagnosed with hypothyroidism, it might be stress too. And actually even women listening, estrogen and progesterone hormones can also be thrown off by too much stress. Stress
Mm.
just messes everything up, and sometimes the medical doctors are like, "Oh, your testosterone is low. Let's give you testosterone," and the real cause is stress.
Mm.
And so it's great that you're making this program. Because oh my goodness, men, um, middle age, you get erectile dysfunction, you get the weight gain that starts, you get the depression that starts. Well, men are prone to depression at all ages, but particularly middle age, there's another wave of depression that happens because oh, I haven't really achieved my goals, or there's the second wave, and then of course health risks start to just skyrocket. And if you haven't been taking care of your health around that 30 to 40 age range, all of a sudden your chance of dying can skyrocket, and you can
Oh
get those
yeah.
chronic diseases, and you have to get sort of your lifestyle under control, or else you're sentencing yourself to death, and you might not see your kids or your grandkids. You might not live to see.
And
Um,
it's often the quality as well, isn't it? Even if you
yeah,
might be there, you're not going to be interacting with them. You're not going to be sort of throwing them in the air. You're not going to be rolling on the ground with them either. These again wonderful, amazing things that you could get so much energy, excitement, and joy from. they're going to be far more difficult.
No, I remember a commercial which left a big impact on me. Now I don't even have a television. I don't know where I saw this commercial on an airport or something, and it was an elderly man, and he was out of shape. He was like dusting off these weights in the garage, and actually I don't think there were weights. I think they were like a chair or something. Like he's basically making weights out of parts in the garage maybe, and he starts doing this very strange exercise, and he's like, ugh. Like he doesn't even do it. And then it shows, month after month of him practicing week after week and gets stronger. And actually, for men, if you're a man listening and you aren't lifting weights, it feels good to lift weights. Heck, it feels good to use your muscles. We're men. It feels darn good. Get some elastic bands, get some weights. It feels great to lift weights. Anyway, he's doing that. He's standing taller as the commercial's going on. He's getting stronger. He's holding heavier weights, and starts to show pictures of the pictures he has. The video starts to show pictures he has in the room of his daughter, their family, and a granddaughter. And then it shows Christmas Day. The granddaughter picks up the star. I'm starting to cry here. And he lifts up the granddaughter, holds the granddaughter out. The
Oh,
granddaughter
nice.
puts the star on top of the tree. And like that's beautiful. And my father and his grandkids, he's running around, he's rolling around on the grass, and you want to have that. And if you're middle aged, you have to. I'm not saying you have to become Arnold Schwarzenegger, who still looks great at like 70 something, but you have to do something just to keep things under control.
Absolutely. No, no, I agree. I mean, there's a couple of points I just wanted to touch on. I mean, the sedentary lifestyle, I think it really was significantly impact, certainly over here, as far as I can relate to. It's partly through that hybrid working as well. So not only we would before sitting in the office
Hmm.
for hours and hours, but potentially maybe getting out for lunch and whatever else. But then all of a sudden, particularly during COVID, and since that hybrid arrangement, there's some really good things about hybrid working, by the way. But just in this case, looking at the more sedentary aspect, people, at least in the office, had like ergonomic chairs, that were at least some degree to the shape of your body
Hmm.
and to align with your body, at least to some extent. And if you did actually, most people don't do it, but if you did get up every hour or so, half an hour, stretch a little bit,
Yeah.
you're still doing pretty well. And then people were coming home throughout COVID, and not only were they not on ergonomic chairs, they were just on soft couches for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And hey, it's so detrimental to your
Yeah.
health.
Yeah.
That curvature and just completely in
It
unnatural
can be as
shape.
bad as smoking.
Yeah, really. Well, I mean, yes, I
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily know that, but yeah, really, really detrimental. And that seemed to also be another layer of interpretation that we had to do with the program really to actually address some of that. So we did have this little booster course actually for office chair exercises, which we used, and we added that sofa exercises as well,
Hmm.
which actually were quite popular. But I think I forgot my next point there, Brandon. So we talked about the chair, yeah, and then the strength side of it. So yeah, absolutely, it is really vital, and a lot of men that I work, not yeah, I'm gonna say a lot that they always want when they think about strength, they often talk about that bulk and six pack and whatever else. And for some people, particularly around certain body shapes, that's probably going to be a little easier anyway.
Hmm.
They're already quite square already,
Hmm.
and you just trim off a little bit of that fat and put a bit of strength in there and a bit of bulk, and they look absolutely amazing. But it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Some people could train for all their life and they'll never be
Yeah.
particularly
Yeah.
chunky, as it were. So we really try to widen that definition of strength, kind of strength of mentality, strength of your physique, strength of your motivation and determination. So we really stretch out that aspect of strength quite a lot. And I think what we do find, maybe this is more with a six pack than just strength, about two-thirds of our clients always want that six pack, get rid of the stomach, be chiseled and all this type of stuff. And again, for some it's a little easier. For most, we can certainly certainly work on some that purchase fat, lower level fat and deeper fat as well, which is really important.
Hmm.
Um, but we often find during the program that no longer becomes the primary goal. It's a lot of the other subtle stuff. And I think you mentioned some things like play with the grandchildren,
Hmm.
things like that, sleeping better, feeling better first thing in the morning, getting a bit of your humor back, all these subtle things that they never ever speak about,
Hmm.
they all of a sudden become the prominent thing. And the six pack is like
Yeah,
seventh or eighth down the
yeah,
list all of a sudden. And that's something that I find very interesting as well.
yeah. And there's something to be said that's negative about aiming for the six pack as you head into this, 60s, 70s, is it's a little unsustainable. Arnold Schwarzenegger he likes exercising, but he hates getting old because it's just so much more work to keep his physique. And it is more work, but it's more about function. It's more about function. You look at the cultures that successfully transition to older age and they keep their fitness and they keep working until their 90s. The Asian cultures, right?
Yes,
And what do all the Asian cultures do? They all do Tai Chi and Qigong,
that's right.
and
Absolutely.
it's they're keeping their body moving. Your
Yeah.
capabilities over time shrink to what you expose your body to every day. So if you don't have your arms above your head for a couple months, and then you go to lift a weight above your head, oh gosh, I hurt my shoulder.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, for me, and that's where virtually all the martial arts come from Asia.
Hmm.
Apart from you could argue Pancration, which is ancient Greek martial arts, right back to cost about 4,000 years ago. Was in the Olympics actually around 650 BC for a long period of time. So that's probably the only one that's not necessarily directly from Asia, and actually used by Hercules apparently. If you took Greek mythology against the Nemean lion, so he was pretty strong. So yeah, but absolutely going back to the Asian side of it. Things like you mentioned around Tai Chi and stuff, some aspects of things like Tai Chi, which we do incorporate, because then they are far more necessary and important than some of the other strengthening stuff, which we do, like
Hmm.
through Muay Thai and stuff, a lot of strengthening stuff. But most of the people that do our program, then none of them turn out to be martial artists. They're not going to be
Yeah.
fighters or anything like that, but they kind of get all the benefits of the digital martial arts for their needs at their time,
Hmm.
and they sometimes feel a bit like a martial artist as well. So that's pretty good anyway. So
Yeah.
they still get some of that bonuses. One thing I always love, and I know a few people have reported on it, is just things like, and again, back to these subtle things, Brandon, where I don't know, they're in the kitchen or something, and a bowl's about to fall, and no one else even knows it's even happening. And they'll just like see it, and they'll stop it, and they're like, "Whoa!" And everyone's like, "What the hell do you do there?" And it's little things like that, that awareness and sharpness, activity that people again just get just have extra bonuses, shall we call them? Because no one comes and says, "I want to stop a bowl falling off the kitchen table." No one ever says that,
Yeah.
but it's a lovely little bonus that most of them get.
We got to wrap it up. I'll add one more story. I was working with an elderly man, 86 or something, and he was doing every exercise that the physiotherapist had prescribed and had been to the neurologist and everything.
Right.
And they said, there's nothing wrong with you. And in fact, when I saw him, I did the same orthopedic, like the standard orthopedic tests, the standard balance tests, and nothing was wrong with him. In fact, he was, as good as I am at doing those tests because he had practiced the tests and practiced the exercises so much. But his problem was he kept on falling over in the kitchen and falling over, getting in and out of his car. And it comes back to keeping your body sort of exposed to different movements, keeping your body sort of limber. And so, because he had done all these exercises in a very rigid way,
I see.
and a lot of physiotherapists are sort of stuck in this is the way I'm trained. These are the set exercises. This is the protocol. A lot of people sort of plateau when seeing a physiotherapist if they're following the protocols because they don't
Mm.
expand to what someone does in their everyday. No one ever said. So what I did with him is we set up like a fake kitchen, and I said, okay, let's look at you. You practice cooking, and he wasn't moving his feet underneath the center of gravity. His body had sort
Oh.
of forgotten how to move his feet properly. So we ended up sort of testing that, him moving around the fake kitchen as I kept on like shoving him, so we'd have to like rebalance, and so it was it was fun. It felt a little cruel because I kept on like shoving and pushing him, but it was great. And after a few sessions of that, he was back to being confident, and because you start to lose your confidence because. And he was retired, put 100% effort into doing the exercises he was told to do, and he wasn't getting the results, and it was missing variety, and then he actually started to run again at 86. He started to jog again
Amazing.
because he felt more confident in his body again.
Yeah.
You mentioned like
Excellent.
people have a negative spiral they can go down, and then people can have this positive spiral. They start to feel better. They start to feel better. They do more. They feel better. They do more. They feel better. They start to hang out with their friends again. They feel better. They take up the hobbies they left alone. They feel better. They feel better. They feel better until they're a bundle of smiles, and they look
Absolutely.
10 years younger.
No. Yeah, 100%. And I think there's something about sort of identity theory, I suppose, kind of through your adolescence, some of it you're kind of prepared for. And I think there's something about middle age in general that you're probably supposed to have sussed most of that out. And I think at this, let's call it the second stage of your life, you're not as you haven't sorted it all out. And I think if you look at even things like employment, certainly it's quite a few years ago now, I must admit, but certainly as men, that was part of your concrete identity for pretty much all your life. That's virtually disappeared now. And I do think that's quite an important pillar that seems to impact on identity and confidence as well with a lot of middle-aged men.
So I'll take a moment to mention now that on your website you have a free ebook as a resource, navigating middle-aged men's transition, a guide to reinventing yourself,
Absolutely.
and of course,
Yes, and God,
of
sorry,
course,
Brandon.
you have information about your integrated martial arts method, and they can contact you through your website.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the best single resource to go through, where you could pretty much get everything, including the two ebooks that you mentioned. So that's davefergusoncoach.com. So you can get them resources that you've just mentioned, where we do tackle some of the issues that we've really touched upon today around identity, confidence, and well-being. I talked about the impact of the neurological understanding. I'm by
Mhm.
no means an expert, but for me, and this has continued through a lot of my clients, the importance of being aware of your brain health and learning more about that seems really important. And I think it's particularly, well, it's almost for everyone, but particularly maybe people with less resources. And
Mm,
that's why I really think it's important to have these free options as well,
mm.
because I think those potentially at the lower educational attainment, they haven't quite got that knowledge. And when they do get that knowledge, it's often that eureka moment. So really important to make sure we have an aspect of free resources. If you want to know anything more about some of our programs, that's also on the website as well. Links to all my social medias on the website as well. So everything you can get from there. If you want to know a little bit more about some of my main programs, you can also book a courtesy call as well for more information about that. And if you mention this podcast, then we could look at just to provide some additional value. We could look at a brain screening option for that as well. But if you do highlight, if you do book a call, just make sure you put Brandon's name on there, guys. Okay.
And thank you so much for educating our audience, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Brandon.